Hey, hope you guys had a good holiday break. Before I dive into this week's episode, definitely want to talk about this OpenAI stuff. So from last week, fire, hire, rehire, Microsoft, taking Sam, the former CEO, and now Sam back as the regular CEO. So many things that shook the AI world. A lot of it, I think, is driven by money and for profit. If you believe in any of the conspiracy, I guess Elon puts it best, asking the board to share the information that spooked them to do something so drastic as to fire a CEO that is leading the AI race, right? So it's pretty ironic that the whole internet and the public opinion is defending Sam and wanting him to be reinstated and virtuous about him being in the position that he needs to be, which is back at his company. And quite possibly, it's ironic because quite possibly it could be the reason of future doomsday of the human race, if any of the rumors are true. But I guess we'll find out in the next week or so. The main rumor is that they cracked a major breakthrough of achieving AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which is the main thing that all these companies are striving for. And if they're having a for-profit mindset, the securities are not put into place to kind of protect the people that needs to be protected. So in other news, how it shifts the charge and leads for our industry and the game industry is going to be very interesting. I mean, if a breakthrough has been achieved, that means if this year was fast and too crazy for the entertainment, imagine what next year looks like if they 10x their growth in AI. I mean, we're already seeing tools left and right about enhancing the workflow and basically job replacement for a lot of disciplines, and at the very least, job efficiency, quote unquote, right? But it's definitely interesting to see how this unfolds. It's happening pretty fast, which is how this TikTok generation and AI tends to work. It works really fast. So it's very good, if anything, to pay attention to all the stuff you guys are for or against it. As always, I want to do a shout out for those that are joining us in the Discord to discuss in between episodes of latest news such as this, to talk to me while we wait for the next week's episode. Link in descriptions. As always, I want to welcome Breckle into the server, who is the latest and greatest that jumped in. Hopefully you guys are finding that there's a community here to support you in these very try times. And kind of as a weekly tradition, I'm going through the Apple iTunes page of Game Dev Unchained to share reviews. This is a great way for me to kind of recenter the focus and to make adjustments as needed, because your guys' feedback is monumental to the success of the podcast. So I appreciate it. This one's from that guy at Apple. I'm starting from the very beginning and jumping all over the place, good or bad. 5-star review on this one, or I'll promise I'll read a bad one next time. This is by That Game at Apple, one of our first reviews back in 2015. And it's crazy to kind of think it's been 8 years. It's great to have forums dedicated to game development. It's also great to have interviews and behind the scenes in game development on AAA titles. It's even better when you have people who love creative games and have the industry experience talking firsthand on what it's like. I read the book in a couple of days and loved it. Can't wait to hear you guys talk about the industry. I also hope you guys cover topics on the art side of things. I am an environment artist myself, and I would love to hear opinions on tools and workflows and just game development overall. Well, thank you for that game at that guy at Apple. Hopefully you're still with us. Shout out in Discord if you ever get the chance. Would love to kind of talk to you at length. But it was one of the first reviews, and it was awesome when both Larry and I saw that. And it was actually very humbling to kind of see that anyone is listening. So if you guys ever get a chance, if you guys are long-term listeners, drop over at the Apple Podcast page, drop any type of ratings, 5-star review is the best. Obviously, this gives visibility in the store page. And if you like it, you can even just drop the 5-star. You don't have to say anything, but I will shout out and read your messages just to kind of give a highlight to those who are taking the extra step. In conclusion, as always, every episode, as a reminder, is accompanied by an article. I want you guys to be able to kind of trace back previous episodes and look at the highlights of them in very pretty much detailed notes if you don't want to listen to it again. But there are so much information, so much valuable gems that are pretty timeless for a game developer to reference to either get in the industry, get through the industry, going from smaller studios to bigger studios, or to going indie, getting out of the industry, doing something on your own, getting publishing, all this stuff. I try to make sure that I dilute, the valuable gems in each of these episodes on an article that is something that you can peruse through and look at and be able to kind of trace back whenever you desire that is relevant to your life and to your career. So see you guys on the website. As always, wherever you're listening to, thank you. And on to this week's episode. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Game Dev Unchained, the #1 game development podcast about game development and the lifestyle thereof. I am your host, Brandon Pham, and with me, a returning guest from a while back, Pete Bottomley. How you doing, Pete?
Hello, Brandon. How are you today?
Good. So this is part of the podcast where I let our guests introduce themselves to the listeners out there of who they are, where they've been, where they're at, where they're heading. Just a short introduction.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the co-founder and studio head over at White Paper Games. We're a studio based in the UK. We've been operating for over 12 years now. We mainly focus on PC and console, more narrative-driven, cinematic style of titles, all developed in Unreal Engine. I guess that's a high-level version of me.
Perfect, man. I think we were just briefly talking about the last time I talked to you was 2018. A lot has happened since. It was actually a great opportunity for me to talk to a lot of people I talked to before the pandemic, before this storm that I think the game industry is going through right now. And actually a return to narrative games. I feel like the last few years, there's been a big focus back to single player narrative games. And these are, as usual, we'll explore all these topics, but first come, first serve, man. You look well. I'm glad to see you around. And
yeah. Yeah, it was funny because we released a 10-year documentary around, 2022. And it was just funny to see how things just don't change over 10 years as well. Like people still look the same, act the same, but then also so many things are different as well. So it's good to catch up again, Brandon.
Yeah. So have things changed, at least for you and your studio, because of the pandemic, since the pandemic? I mean, that was a major paradigm shift for a lot of small and big companies at that time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question you could answer in many ways. Operationally, I don't think we've changed too much. We were just beginning production on our third title as the pandemic hit. So in March 2020, thankfully, we had just signed the deal around that January, February time. And we had already built the team. We kind of knew what we were doing. We had processes, operations in place. So, you know, outside of unplugging PCs in the studio, because we have a physical studio based in Manchester, apart from unplugging PCs and heading home, nothing really impacted us, thankfully. It was more on the kind of, family, friends, just making sure everyone was okay kind of side. But operationally, nothing too much changed for us. And we pretty much just shipped that entire game um, through the lockdowns in the UK. So, yeah, operationally, things didn't change too much. On the back end of that, things have definitely changed. It was an intentional push after our third title, because historically our first game was called Ether 1. It released on PC first and then went onto PlayStation 4. And that took us just 4 years of bootstrapping and just pushing to get our first video game out into the world, self-published. And thankfully it did critically and commercially well enough for us to make our next title. And so The Occupation then was our second title, which I believe is where we kind of synced up on the back end of The Occupation there. And that again was about a 4-year process. So we intentionally wanted to do something more along the lines of 28 months development-ish, kind of 2 years and some change there. With the goal that we actually wanted to go multi-project after that project. So we kind of built out the team enough. We generally try to increase a team by about 3 people-ish every project. So we're now around the 16 mark at the studio. And we're kind of working on a few different things. So we definitely changed. I don't think it's necessarily due to any of the pandemic or the lockdowns, but also things, as you alluded to at the top of the call, are just different in the industry right now. Whether it be studio security, just the finance coming into games. There is a shift in narrative games, which is nice to see. But yeah, just everything is very, very different. As we're speaking at the back end of 2023 right now.
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to the next year. There's a certain level of conservatism from every developer, every studio. There's definitely a lot of cutbacks and a lot of people just waiting to see. I do feel it's an overreaction, but there is an overcorrection as well, right? I think the pandemic, there was a lot of hype and money coming into the industry in various ways, like NFT, blockchain, all this stuff, just fresh money. And I think, in a small way, remote really worked for a lot. We talked very extensively about that in the show. But what we're also seeing, like a real push to go back in the office. And a lot of people are saying this is a big hard reset for, unfortunately, what was very heavy handed on the employee side, right? For the last 2 years. It's just like, hey, I want to live on a farm. I'll come into work whenever I want to. You'll see me in the Zoom meeting. And I think there was a good period where everybody was jumping ship whenever they wanted to, because it was a very employee heavy, very one-sided, in my opinion. And this is coming from a person that have always fought for the worker and everything, right? But I always felt any exaggeration from any direction to any direction is never a bad thing. It always has to be a balanced relationship, right? So seeing kind of like how, being directly affected, but also kind of being an observer, what do you think is kind of going on right now? And is 2024 as scary, or are we looking at like at least the first 2 quarters of weathering the storm, or is it the whole year type of thing?
Yeah, so I believe this information was in we have like a games jobs kind of direct style service in the UK. And kind of if we look at the trajectory of jobs, size of teams, money coming into the studios from before 2019, and if you build that kind of curve for the few years before 2019, going up through the pandemic. Of course, it took a steep rise, but year on year, we're actually ahead despite all the layoffs and the finance where the industry should be. So the game industry is still thriving. People are still being hired. There's still projects to be made. Which isn't a consolation for the people being laid off from large studios, big and small studios. It's definitely a tough time from a developer perspective in the industry, but there's still plenty of there's still plenty of hiring going on. There's still teams needing to build projects, and kind of an interesting observation that's kind of obvious to say out loud, but it kind of helps the developer put it into perspective is publishers need to make games. Otherwise, that's their whole business model. They need to create games, develop games, publish games, and generate revenue from those games. So there's still games to be made. Now, the thing about that is from publisher conversations that we've been having where their portfolio, used to be X, signing number of games for 2024 onwards, that may have taken a 30 to 40% hit. In some extremes, maybe 60 to 70% hit. So they're signing much fewer titles. They're being way more selective with the titles. And they're also taking longer to sign these titles because the supply and demand is way up. There's developers, which are the supply. There's a lot of suppliers, a lot of developers looking for money. So the demand is high on the publisher side, which means they can take longer to pick through the bets that they want to make because there's plenty of developers looking for money. So that's one side of it. I've heard from just people kind of on the more financing side of the industry that kind of teams really need to shore up through 2024. So even Q1, Q2, like you say, I don't think it's going to start lifting until Q3, Q4 through to 2025. So, teams really want to be putting that focus in, operating as leanly as they can through to next year. Smart processes, smart tools, just being, but still being creatively driven, still trying to push the bar, still being technically driven, because ultimately they're going to be the interesting projects that get signed. So, yeah, it's definitely tough. I see it going on for at least another, 9 months or so. But it's also an exciting time. Like you said, there's still some great projects coming out. So, we can't complain being able to wake up and make video games every day. So it's definitely feel privileged to do that.
Yeah, I think anybody that was looking at that steep rise that we witnessed during the pandemic, if you have any kind of experience in the stock market, what comes up will come down. And I was waiting for that draw. I was like, man, this is just going too far. It felt like, this the moment was around this time where the money dries up a bit. Honestly, a lot of it was like when Elon Musk started buying Twitter and cut 80% of the workforce. Right. To me, that kind of marked the beginning of the tech industry doing really kickstarting the year of efficiency, like at Facebook, Google, like all these layoffs started happening in the thousands. And then what I see is like this trickle down effect to the game industry, kind of doing like a monkey see, monkey do type of thing. And it's like, well, they're obviously have a lot of analytics. Therefore, we need to start from the base. What is our efficient baseline, and then build up, because a lot of these job losses that we're witnessing is there's a lot of recruiters. Well, when companies are losing recruiters, they're not looking to hire at least a large amount for a while, right? Usually 3 to 6 months. So I agree with you. I think it will probably last till half a year before we start seeing things really getting back to normal. But the redeeming thing is like what you said. There's streaming games, all these different companies, Netflix getting into it. Like the business itself, the industry itself is healthier than ever. More and more are getting into the game business. game IPs as a movie, as a TV show is prospering for the first time in our history. So like a lot of people are looking at games as the next frontier of just marketing opportunities that wasn't there before. I mean, I think Fortnite helped a lot with that. With every time there's a movie out, there's like a season drop pack, right, that ties into it. And I was just talking to a friend about this. It's either Fortnite or Dead by Daylight. So it was like if you have a mature horror, it's Dead by Daylight. Everything else that kind of fits within the Fortnite, spectrum goes to Fortnite. But that's it. So that's another opportunity. It's like if there's ever a game to tie in commercial licenses, there isn't much that movies or entertainment or sports can go to for games, and they are looking for it, right? I mean, there's so many different things that don't fit perfectly within Fortnite and Dead by Daylight, right? So
Yeah, and I think just on that is that, I mean, Behavior Interactive, we've spoken to a few people there, and they're just a super talented team, and just what they're doing with IP and just the dominance that they have in the industry. Like any kind of the current industry trends that are going on, they seem to be booking that stuff and just really driving through and making some really smart decisions. So there's a lot to learn from Behavior there on that respect. And also, I think, just with this being a more of a game developer focused podcast, especially for anyone that's kind of self-publishing their work, when you touch upon the IP section, that's definitely been a goal of ours, even since Either One, to retain. I mean, I would never recommend developers sign over their IP, and generally publishers aren't asking for IP. It's not really, I know maybe, 15 years or so ago that would have been usual practice, but developers keeping their IP is one thing, but also just keeping the as much of the royalty share as you can, ideally 100%, but obviously, if you want to get funding for your game, you'll have to give up some of that stuff. But then also on the kind of secondary media side, which can include film, television, merchandise, all this kind of secondary media stuff, make sure you're not signing any of that away in your contracts, because like you say, if the Netflix comes calling, or someone at CAA wants to buy the rights for a script treatment or something like this, then you don't want to be giving up those rights unnecessarily to anyone that might have published the video game side of your work. So thinking about that larger portfolio should definitely be an intention as that industry starts shifting towards other platforms for the IP.
yeah, there's definitely a trend that I'm seeing slowly coming back. I mean, you were talking about bootstrapping your guys' first game, self-publishing. And then we had, back then it was more encouraging to do something like that with Steam and Kickstarter and crowdfunding. Then it died a bit, right? But now I feel like it's slowly becoming a thing with tools being stronger, smaller teams can produce a lot more. It's more feasible, right? To kind of work small. What is how true is that? Like in 2020 through 2024, if a small team has an idea, what are they looking out for? They have these two avenues of self-publish or looking for funding. Like, what would your advice? Would be the red flags? What would the parameters be that would suffice either or?
Yeah, I guess the big disclaimer here is that I've not done that for 12 years. So any advice is going to be outdated, and you've just got to listen to a bunch of different sources and just kind of figure out the best move for you. Every situation and context is going to be different. How much you need to live on, how much you can bootstrap it. Do you have other sources of income to rely on? All these things are a factor. If you can bootstrap it and support yourselves through the development of your first title, that helps massively, because you have 100% of that income from game sales coming in. you are in a place to negotiate deals and a much better understanding of what it is you want to do if you're making your first project and you're not familiar with publishing agreements and just understanding how much makes sense to give away. They can be really tough decisions to make because you have no context, you have no track record. That's an incredibly tough thing. The only thing I can recommend is definitely getting some legal support. We did not do that for our first couple of games. And there's lawyers out there that will help developers, especially if they know they're bootstrapping. They'll do some work for free up front. I know that's the case in the UK games space. So hopefully that's the case in some other countries. But making sure you have some legal support in your network, I think, is a useful thing. But yeah, if you can bootstrap, I would definitely take that approach. It's tough. It really helps you focus the vision on what it is you want to create. It's a sense of achievement when you get it out the door. But the converse to that point is that I have seen teams, first of all, the lean model of developing teams as a startup is the same, is applicable even when you're 12 years later and you're working on your teams. Like we have maintained a lean team. Like I said, we're still 16 after 12 years. So hiring for the specific skill sets that you need, maybe not trying to create a team just as friends because friends are there. If you have multiple of roles on a small team, that can lead to issues. But I think the larger thing that I see smaller teams doing is sometimes trying to create a small version of a thing that they know they can ship, which they may not be necessarily passionate about, but they know is achievable within the time and the money available, which is still an achievement. But more often what you see is that the game comes out and it doesn't really have an impact because it wasn't necessarily either a unique concept or it's pushed something forward. It's just, in quotations, a product that they shipped. And if that falls flat, it can be demoralizing. It's tough for publishers to buy in on their next title because the track record wasn't super strong. And all these things can be a factor. So either, I guess from my perspective, taking one or two routes, either brute force through it, make the title that you really want to make, and you'll have overscoped it and underestimated the time, and it'll be brutal and it'll be tough to get out, but you'll release and it'll be something you're proud of. Making sure that you are doing all the non-game development side of things, which no doubt you've had 100 conversations on this podcast about, making sure you market, making sure you're reaching out to press. Just, you got to do the business side of that as well as just making a great video game. So either you take that approach, or you do get early investment and you take some of the risk off the table. You make sure you budget for what you expect, especially for your first game. I'd probably then double that, and that's what your publishing budget would be. And then at least you have security and you still try and make something that you're super proud of. If you can get it critically well received, that really helps for your next publishing deal. But essentially it's just, okay, we've got one game in mind. Okay, now we've shipped one game. Now let's move on to the next game. And at least for us, we never built a studio that I foresaw a trajectory of 12 years. I mean, it was never not that, but it was always, let's just make a game. Let's make the best game we can. And then after that, it's like, okay, what do we do next? And it was always just that one foot in front of the other type mentality. So yeah, but it is tough. And I know that it's tough, and it is more likely even tougher than it was in 2012 because there was that wave of indie games coming out. As you said, we got the push of Steam Greenlight early on in those days, where developers were now allowed on Steam, and you could you had an audience there that was interested in looking for these smaller games. Epic was doing a lot to support smaller teams, especially in the early days, going from UDK to UE4. Sony was a big kind of backer of, I think it was like We Love Devs or something like that. It was some kind of indie focused push from Sony, sorry. Again, around that 2014 time. So Yeah, it was easier to get caught up in that rush. So I appreciate the toughness right now of where the current industry's at. But like we said before, publishers are still making games, publishers are still signing games. For me, I feel like it's almost easier to sign the sub 500K game. So I don't know, call it $700,000 or something, like sub $700,000, or, 5 million plus dollar games. That middle area, which is actually where we land, is a tough market to be in. But yeah, it's definitely a great thing if small teams can create a little startup and make a game that they're super proud of.
Mhm. I think the constant worry, at least for first time developers that are looking or seeking funding, is that obviously losing control, being rushed, right? I mean, it is a creative process. And then especially for that first game, it's hard to kind of estimate how long it takes to find the soul of the game, right? And as much a lot of the failures of these startups is that they accept money and that's the goal, is like, get the money, we're good, right? But then obviously a lot of them don't ship, a lot of them fail, or it's a countdown clock, and everything feels rushed, everything feels incomplete, and people are crunching, putting the heart and soul, and just crash and burn, right? So that I would love to kind of hear you kind of speak on those fears. Is like, well, the advantages that you kind of laid out is, like, it gives you security, it gives you sometimes guaranteed time to keep the team together to kind of push this goal. It forces you to budget, it forces you to be more concise on your game design, right? As concise as you can be. uh but what would you say to these developers that haven't been through this process of funding, just thinking that anybody that are funding are evil, which just can't be true, right? Um, what do you say to these guys with these type of fears?
So are you framing that in terms of how you should pitch your project to potential publishers? Are you asking how you kind of how you understand how to budget and scope your game before you've got investment? Like, what kind of direction would you like to take that in?
Um, Either or. I think at the baseline is, I have this idea, I got this team, but I've never been through this funding. I just have this, like, general vague feeling about anybody that wants a piece of the game, wants a piece of the company, or more so about themselves than you. Obviously, that's for obvious reasons, right? And uh we just hear so many games, just crashing and burning before actually finding its footing and its soul, right? Which hopefully can be done within 6 months or 1 year of pre-production. But with games, it's such a enigma. It's kind of foolish to kind of feel that way sometimes, um it being such a creative venture, right?
Yeah.
um
Okay. Yeah. So I think a few things on that is that definitely expanding your network, because there's a lot of really smart game developers that have written very articulate articles and posts on LinkedIn, things like this. Like, I only just came across Rami's blog. I forget the URL. I'm not sure if you know it, but definitely post that to your audience. He writes about a lot of just best practices when pitching. I noticed he has templates on how to budget your game. And just a lot of really strong advice, especially for new teams when approaching those publisher conversations, to decide about the creativity aspect and just understanding the vision of your game. I would definitely hold off publisher conversations, especially if you've not a team with a proven track record, until that vision of the game. And that can take a while. It can take some prototyping. Ether 1 started off as not Ether 1. Ether 1 became Ether 1 because we had to cut the game in a third. And Ether 1, there was still an Ether 2 and Ether 3, and we never went back to that. So we already knew we had to scope the game down by a third, and that's blatant in the name there. But it was also, a sci-fi, third person, more platformy puzzle game. We brought it into first person. Ether 1 still had some sci-fi elements, but then we introduced some more narrative themes of dementia with Lewy bodies. And then we also had themes of one of the family members having alcoholism. And we had these strong themes in there that were wrestling with each other. And it was only midway through development where we realized, okay, we need to strip this alcoholism theme out, not because it's not important, but we need to be speaking about dementia with Lewy bodies because that's the heart of the game. And we wouldn't have known that going into publisher conversations. We wouldn't have known that the scope was off. And I feel like even if you're able to spend 9 months just trying to prototype, start development, and just have a strong vision for the game before you start speaking to publishers, I think that will be beneficial to you as long as you can articulate what you believe the game is. It may shift and change after those publisher conversations, but at least open the publisher conversations with a clear idea about what you believe the game is right now. And you may get feedback and they may not understand certain arcs in the story or certain core loops that you're trying to design or any of these things. And that's just good feedback. A publisher no is still feedback in terms of they may be not yet. I mean, it's generally never a hard no unless it's just not a portfolio fit or it's just the types of budgets you're looking for are way too small or too big, conversely for them. So generally it's just a not yet type of thing. So don't get disheartened by drawn out publisher discussions. Again, going back to the point where they may just keep you waiting for a few months just to see what's out there. And it may, it's never a yes until that contract is signed. And I know a few people have said that. So I'm probably stealing multiple sources there. But until you have that publisher agreement signed and there's a contract, that publisher is not saying yes. And so be wary of that. Long drawn out discussions. Don't rely on vague promises or things until there's something contractually written down. So I guess that's to say that it's okay if your game does shift and change, but just make sure whenever you're having publisher discussions, you have the currently clearest vision of what you believe the game is, and you're excited about that. And it may change. I'm actually currently rereading Creativity Inc. for like the third or fourth time right now because Ed Catmull released an expanded edition. So for people that have read Creativity Inc. Before, there is expanded chapters and they're pretty sizable and chunky. So I think that's just solid reading for anyone in the game development industry, of course, just any of the real-time industry or any kind of film or creative aspirations there, but especially for people just wanting to start small teams, trying to find books like Creativity Inc. They'll definitely help guide the path. And the reason why I mentioned that is because there's a section where it talks about a bunch of the film directors using different analogies for how Pixar stories come to be. So some people phrase it as running down a really long dark tunnel. You can't quite see the end, but you know it's going to end at some point and you've just got to find your way to the end. Some people talk about it as following a maze in the dark and you're just trying to touch the sides and navigate your way through to the center. Some people talk about it as like an archaeological dig where the game is in there somewhere. And you've just got to uncover it and piece together the parts and see what fits. So that's more just to say, hopefully that gives you confidence that no one knows really what the true vision of the game until you get into that back quarter, maybe even 8/10 of the way. I've heard stories about, I think the first Last of Us, where the clickers weren't quite right or the combat wasn't quite right until months before going gold, things like this, just really dialing in the experience. So It happens on every project. It's going to take shifts and turns, and the publisher will know to expect that. But you've got to know and have the clearest vision about what the project currently is to be able to articulate that and be excited about that.
Right. I think there's always like a balance of deadlines are great because it does pressure, gets the team kind of unite and deliver something. And then, you know, the laid back creativity can spinning your wheels forever, you know, is never a good thing. I mean, Blizzard infamously kind of made it, and Valve, right, has that moniker, never ship till it's done, right? So, well, you'll never ship anything, right? And that too, I think, you know, at a core, you know, a developer likes completing things that they start, right? They like closure on projects that they have. And the sweet mark, at least for me, is like 3 years average, right? Maybe 4. But like anything past 5, it's like, man, my kid is like going to college. And it's always been an uncomfortable length of time for me to develop on any project. Uh Even more so now, since games are taking longer to make. I have friends on these long AAA projects still. I've gotten out since that, you know, their kids are like 10 by the time it was just born, and now they're 10, you know. And it's just a lifetime for a game developer to kind of, because at a certain point, if you're not the designer, you're an artist, you're kind of doing the same thing over and over. You're not really making anything new. You're not learning new techniques. You're trying to, but not really. You're just trying to get things done, right? So it's interesting to kind of hear um, what you're saying, but also I want to dive into. Um, I think you can only, you know, obviously speak from your own experience, but from what you've seen as well. Like, what is the average length of time of like, I'm starting to pitch, we're signing a deal, right? How long should people be prepared to in that process of, realistically, this is when you're actually going to get money for your projects. So you got to have enough in the bank there to kind of withstand this length of time after you have your vision, after you have an idea how to make it, right?
Yeah, so I guess again, context is going to be super important there. I I guess I'll try and approach it as best I can, assuming there's zero network currently built. Kind of just starting day one, reaching out. So I think the first step that I'd take is start talking to platforms and engine providers, any kind of source of funding like that. So, you know, a Sony or an Xbox might be interested in picking up your title, or at least they may have some programs out there where it helps you get some free support, get a small amount of cash. There's a Unreal Engine mega grants from Epic Games if you're using Unreal Engine. There's a few things that you could do just as a first step to start making those connections, and just connect with those people, have discussions, and maybe just keep them updated month to month, or maybe every few months as your conversations are going. But then, assuming that you have a pitch deck together, let's call it an 8 to 10 slide pitch deck. Let's assume you've got your budget, you've added 50% to it, and you feel like you can make the game for this much money. And, you know, you should probably have some kind of, teams call this different, but like pitch deck, a prototype, some kind of proof of concept, minimum viable product, you know, something playable that demonstrates the gameplay mechanics that a publisher can play and understand what your game is. I think, especially for a new team, it'll be very hard to get a game signed without some kind of prototype. So let's assume all those things are in place. If you're an unknown person reaching out to a publisher, that could be a very long wait. I've seen publishers post messages saying, you know, sorry, I'm not being rude, but I've got 200 inbound pitches in my inbox just from the last 2 months. So I'm just working my way through them, and I'll get back to you. So the best thing you're gonna want to do there is if you have any local expos that you can go to where publishers might be, and you can just start making connections with publishers at shows, conferences, local meetups, anything like that. If you can be a face behind the email, I think that's going to be super, super helpful. And make sure you keep those contacts up to date and they know what you're working on. Then maybe I would say have a spreadsheet with the list of all the publishers in there. Hopefully contact emails for each of the publisher. Try and find someone specific, maybe someone specific that likes the kind of games that you're developing, and begin those conversations. There's going to be multiple stages to those conversations. There's going to be an initial, do we think this game is even? There'll probably be some kind of, maybe they want to see something different. Maybe they want to see something more. I think I read this on Rami's blog actually, and it's only something I came across a few weeks ago. So I definitely recommend people go and check it out because there's a lot of good advice on there. But I believe one of his points was don't fall into the trap of constantly going back. If a publisher says, "Oh, it'd be good if you could just add this one extra level or this one extra feature," then we'll take a look at it again, because maybe they're kicking the can down the road. They're not the developers of the game. They have no invested interest right now. So it's just distracted time away from the game and what you should be working on. So try not to start catering to all the different publisher conversations. I know that was something that he highlighted on his blog. But they'll have some kind of green lighting process going on there. They will want to play a build of the game. There'll be people internally looking at market viability, looking at comparative titles. What are the titles that are similar to yours and how many units have they sold on Steam? What are their average ratings, things like this. People are looking at metrics under the hood. And basically they're asking, okay, you want X amount of money for your game budget that we believe it's going to return whatever multiplier of X that they're wanting to return on their projects. To come back to your original point, how long that might take, we've not begun the pitching process of our fourth game yet. We will be beginning that end of this year, start of next year. I don't perceive, even in our situation where we got 3 games under our belt, we'll have a strong prototype in place. We have connections that we've already made. I'm not expecting anything for 9 to 12 months, i.e. I'm not expecting to begin actual production until January of 2025. It'd be great if, it's a done deal by the summer, but you can't expect that and you can't forecast for that. You can only forecast for what you believe to be true right now. For Ether One, we self-published. For the occupation, we used Ether One's money to get, say, 65%-ish away through development. And because of our first game and because we had already started working on it with our own cash, we then published with Humble Games, who were Humble Bundle at the time. Throughout that, so they kind of wanted to publish our game whilst we're already making it. So that was a pretty quick conversation to have. And we worked with a publisher called Sold Out in the UK, who did the retail version of the occupation, so the boxed version of the occupation. And so we just went straight to them with our third game, Conway, and just said, look, we worked with you on our previous game. We'd like to work with you on the next game. Can we get this signed? And I think that was about a 3 or 4 month process. But again, the landscape has changed and we're making bigger budget titles now internally. So we've stepped up the bar. And so we knew we needed to prove that with a strong prototype. So we've intentionally tried to put a lot more polish into our prototype early on in the process. So I hope that gives some context. And again, that's just my view. November 2023, as a UK developer, as a small team with 16 people. So that can vary massively from studio to studio.
Yeah, of course. I think it's going to be, it's helpful either way. Just kind of hear your experience. Like out of, it sounds like there's, you went through 3 different kind of methods, one self-publishing, second hybrid, third fully published, right? And then fourth, seeking publishing in this landscape. Looking at those, which has been the most pleasing, in terms of terms? You don't have to go into detail of that, but like in terms of where you were like, man, I really liked what happened with this. If we can have this for the rest of our development years, I would be happy. What would that? Which one of those would that be? Not particularly the game, just how it was published, how you guys got halfway there, or whatever, right?
So I guess ahead of my response, I'll acknowledge my own bias that I know I have for this response. And it's not the right thing, but it's just the way I perceive it in terms of, I think Ether One was the strongest, which was our first title. We bootstrapped and we did everything ourselves because we didn't know who to ask for help. We didn't know any other way of doing it, but just figuring out how to do it ourselves. So we only spent £37,000, call it 50,000 US, on Ether One over 4 years, which is
amazing.
That's less than our burn rate right now, is like our monthly rate as a studio right now. So that's crazy in itself. But what we did was we put everything into the game, and especially when it came to the press, we hand wrote every single email. We found the journalists that were reviewing. So we released in 2014. So in 2013, games like Gone Home came out. Anyone that had seen Gone Home or Broken Age or any of these kind of games that were coming out around that time, we would handwrite emails to each of the press publications. We'd author and tailor exactly what we wanted to say and why we wanted them to review the game. And I believe that was partly why we got such a strong Metacritic of 82 coming out of the gate. Of course, we put our everything into the game. We bled into that game, and we just really, really we didn't leave anything on the table with that game. So we knew that, well, we didn't know it would be a strong game, but we knew it was a game that we would be proud of. And then critically, it did well for us. It didn't sell major units out the gate by any means. It still sells to this day, and that's kind of what we believe for our kind of portfolio of games, for them to be evergreen, in terms of someone might just go and think, oh yeah, I want to check out that game, and they'll be able to play it. And we want to make sure it's still available on more platforms, and we keep them up to date and all those kind of things. But yeah, Ether One, in terms of doing it ourselves and reaching out and having the marketing exactly how we wanted it. We released all our own trailers. We made our own plans for when to release, what platforms to release on, and all these kind of things. So the least comfortable in that, and again, it kind of goes on the spectrum, is then the last game that we released, which was easiest in a way because we kind of knew the publishing budget that we needed. We budgeted it pretty well. We shipped on time, on budget. Like everything was straightforward. And considering there was a global pandemic, like we didn't really miss a beat in terms of getting the game together. But then we were also more removed from that process. We weren't speaking to the platforms as much. We weren't speaking to the press as much because we were letting the publisher handle that side of things. So in terms of, we were there making the game, but we didn't see the end results, and we weren't able to connect with the people that we wanted to connect with. So I felt personally too removed in that process. And again, that's my bias in terms of I feel like, part of the reason why you start a small team is because you believe you can do things better than what you could do otherwise. Like you believe you have ideas and a drive to see things through the way you want to do them. So there's intentionally going to be, oh, if I just did this myself, it would be way better. So I acknowledge that that's not always going to be true. But in this instance, I think going into game 4, I want to get back to that maybe hybrid of occupation where it's like, we're fully on the development, we're fully on development, making the best game we possibly can, really trying to stretch ourselves for the budget that we have. That doesn't mean crunching. It just means putting everything into the game we can creatively under the constraints that we have, whether it be time, budget, whatever the constraints are. But then also making sure all aspects are tackled. We've always spoken to the players, but really engaging with players more, engaging with press more, thinking about how we want to market it and really being involved in that end-to-end product. Because I feel like that's one thing I just feel like we didn't do quite as well on our last outing.
Yeah. I mean, personally, right? And I know a lot of listeners kind of share the sentiment. Like a lot of what I do here is asking questions that I'm curious about. And, I talked recently to the guys, the BattleBit remaster, which was like an indie darling this year, right? Just blew out of the gates, and they're young, right? Like the thing that I see with these young developers they remind me a lot of myself right out of college of why I went to the games, right? And I personally keep feeling that I lost my way, chasing AAA, chasing the big titles, right? And then when I speak to these young developers, they're absent from all that drama, office politics, and they're like, we're just trying to make games, and I'll make it for free. I was like, man, how great to not have family responsibilities, you know what I mean? And so when I talk to indie developers, the differences, they always say the same thing as you are. It's like, how, the grind was hard, but we had control, right? And that was the reason why we went small. And that's why I think a lot of people always struggle. It's like, can I self-publish? How far can I self-publish? But, there is, even indie publishing is kind of a new concept, newish, right? We're talking about a decade. Indie publishing, when it was first after the Steam greenlight, it's like, what? These guys are these vampires are going into the space now, right? But obviously, since then, and indie is different. It's not a garage thing. It's just a smaller team. There are a lot of security to it. There's a lot of marketing support and all this stuff so that developers can concentrate on development. But you do start to see the things that was unique to indie that's slipping away, right? I mean, as a developer, you like to be in touch with your customer base. That feedback is, I think, is a lot of what these AAA games, these quad A games are often getting in trouble with. They get so far removed from their player base, and they just make games kind of to like these remakes is kind of to me like a a way of saying like, oh, the old games, the old ways of making things are like these solid game designs from the PS1 days, the Resident Evils, the Ico, the Shadow of the Colossus, the remaking, Metal Gear Solid 3, right? Like, I feel like for a good period, we were missing a lot of those game designs for the bigger games because of the fact that the developers are so far removed, have gotten too big, out of touch, with the process, just showing up to the office, clocking out, right? So I do like the fact there's a return of these single player narrative games that we were kind of hinting at the beginning, because it is starting to get back to the simple enjoyment, right? I'm not dismissing, like, there's a lot of good AAA games like Last of Us and stuff that still have great, but those games take forever to make, right? Like forever, for good reason. But what I guess I'm trying to say is that there is that constant conflict, because I know what you're saying is true. It's like, yeah, man, like there's nothing better than talking to the direct player base and like, what don't you like? What do you like? At the same time, the responsibilities of a studio head is huge. You got to make sure everyone's cool. All right. Not everyone can roll in with like, yeah, I have 3 years of funding for a 6-player, 16 team member. Right. It's like, no, I got to be responsible here. So, it's one of those things where what I'm starting to understand is like, if you can bootstrap as far as you can, at least get through the conceptual stage, a solid prototype, game loop or whatever, get it to the fun place, prove it out in terms of like length of time, because you do need that data. And a lot of teams, a lot of startups, and especially in the pandemic, man, everybody and their mom was starting a new studio. In my opinion, the last 2 years that have no business in starting a studio. You know what I mean? I feel this might sound like age bias, but like I feel like it's a young man's game in a way to start a new studio. Is like, and I might be an unpopular opinion. It's like, if you want to start up, you got to be willing to lose everything. And I'm not talking about just finance. It's like your family, your wife and kids. Like, you got to risk it all. And so a lot of people are kind of going these safety nets during the pandemic that I knew was going to be a problem, because a lot of startups aren't making it right now, where they're basically going into funding with the resume. It's like, I was a part of this big game. Give me money, right? And they go on a hiring spree, right? I want the best of the best. And then 1 year, the alarming thing, and maybe not alarming, is like, usually I see that they have like 2 years runway, right? Doing that kind of sloppiness. But like this year, it's been 1 year. Like, these startups have only lasted 1 year exactly to the dot. Like 12 months later, no more funding. Everyone's laid off. So there's a huge irresponsibility that's also happening from the developer standpoint, that I think it's just so unhealthy for our industry right now. Right. So I think there's a lot of concentration on these big companies doing layoffs, looking at the Excel sheet and having to cut back, right? As they always do. Right. But no one is kind of pointing at kind of irresponsible development right now that is kind of hurting everyone else that does have a good idea, that does have a solid plan, that does have the passion and willingness to burn the night oil, to do whatever it takes to get the game out, right? Everyone's, I don't know what it is. They haven't really coined the term of the pandemic, what do you go, honeymoon phase, right? Where everyone's like, I can live on a farm and I can do this forever. There was a little bit of naiveness that was going on that I knew was trouble. I don't know if you saw that, but like, I was like, oh, this is not realistic, guys. I would love to kind of hear more of that, because you being there from the very beginning, doing this bootstrapping way before all this, you knew how much it takes, how hard it really is, and you were seeing basically easy money happening, right? Undeserved, in my opinion, being given out.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things on your point there is that, just to touch upon, because I feel like maybe I missold a point that I was making about the publishing deal, in terms of I'm not aware of even the team surrounding us, and this has never happened to us, where the publisher has taken away any kind of control from the game. For the most part, publishers are there to support the developer. So the publishers are very asking, like, how do you want to approach this? Like, the developer in most respects sets their own milestones, but then you've just got to hit them. And, there is certain wiggle room. Like, we've seen publishers kind of supporting the devs above and beyond, and like, okay, let's add a bit more budget to the development budget, but okay, let's really try and ship. So publishers are more just trying to keep in check what you originally agreed to in the publishing agreement. And I think the reason why we lost track with the press, the platforms, the players as much is because you bring on a publisher to help deal with some of that stuff. Like, you want to put a lot of focus in the game, and the marketing is super important. That the player base, like, you wouldn't be making these games if it wasn't for the players. and you know the platform relationships and the press relationships are important. But that's why you kind of want a publisher to help support that. But as soon as you say, okay, could you handle that? That's where the disconnect happens. And I just feel like just more thoughtful execution on that front, because the publishers are ultimately there to support you, and they've got a portfolio of 5 or 6 games that they're probably trying to ship next year, and they want to plan your marketing beats 9 months out and start planning that stuff. And sometimes you want to be a bit more reactive to the climate and, oh, should we put a trailer together and just discuss these things? So you want it more free flowing. So I think just being aware of that more than anything. So I didn't want to missell that the publishers take away control, because I think for small teams especially, I think publishers will be there to support you and help you ship your first game. So I by no means see that as a negative experience. But anyway, to your larger point about pandemic funding, or like people starting up studios, I think it's great to see more smaller teams forming. I believe games are going to go the way that maybe potentially part of the film industry goes, albeit a little bit more connected. So like films come together, like you have a director, a producer, a scriptwriter, all these people kind of come together, cinematographer, they make this project and they disband. And that kind of works well for the film industry. I don't think games will be like that, but I think games will be made by increasingly smaller teams with better tools. I feel like, 20 plus people, if they can make a Hellblade style game, that kind of sets a quality bar. And of course, there's going to be need for larger teams. Even with Naughty Dog making better tools and better processes, they're still going to need large teams. So I'm not saying that it's going to be across the board, but I believe there's more room on the smaller studio end for talented people wanting to make games, and more of those kind of budget of games I think is useful. The thing that I'd add to that though is that whether it's like a technical co-founder and a creative co-founder, someone that knows coding and someone that has an art director background or something like that, they're not the only two components you need for a team, especially if you're taking external money, and especially if you need to grow a team from 0 to 50 within 6 months, because culture is such a massive part of that process. And I know that word gets banded around a lot, but like from the culture that we developed on Ether One, I mean, I've told this story before, but that same mentality that I took into Ether One, I'm pushing it through. I'm going to make it work however I can. Taking that as a cookie cutter approach, and not intentionally so, but applying that to the occupation as the team expanded a little bit. Again, I mentioned that we added 3 more people to the team for the next project. And now we had a few more specialized roles, and there was that little bit less control because someone else was handling this thing that I was handling before. And now I can't just go in and change it. I've got to kind of communicate how I need it changing. And this phrase of abdicating versus delegating became very clear to me. Abdicating is when you say, here's this stuff that I was doing, you go and do that. And that's just losing responsibility. Whereas clear delegating is explaining why you want something a certain way. Even though it takes a lot longer, you've got to explain the twists and turns you took to get there. You've got to be clear in your attention. So 50% of it is articulating the vision of what you want, and then 50% of it is doing the work. So I became way more cognizant of that, or the back end of the occupation, about really intentionally building the team and how the team operate, and putting processes in place to help support the team. That's a super important aspect to your studio. So, when it's hard because that metric of 5% of startups will succeed and the rest will fail. Like, it's just dumb luck if you can succeed. Like, throughout our history, that if Epic hadn't have taken us to this event and this publisher might not have seen us, or if Sony hadn't put us on PS Plus in May of 2015, would we have had enough cash to get through to the occupation? And all these different things are factors. So I'm by no means saying the path was intentional and well planned out. many things had to go right for us to be here 12 years later. So I don't want to discount that. But at the same time, if you're trying to build and grow a team, you really want to be focused on the team. You want to be hiring really talented individuals that want to collaborate as part of a team, that can be creatively open, very candor in their the terminology being like radical candor, where you can just give open and clear feedback, and people are open to receive that feedback, and just really want to make the best game you can. I don't think just throwing a lot of money and just some technical and creative co-founders and just hiring skilled people is all just part of that process. So again, Creativity Inc. is an excellent book. The Netflix something, Why Rules or something like that. It's something to do with rules. That's a really good book on culture. Radical Candor, the book, excellent. And also, It Doesn't Need to Have to Be Crazy at Work by Jason Fried, another excellent book. And using those as starting points about how you want to start thinking about building teams and building culture, that for me is possibly what's missing, apart from just bad climate, unfair demands, and just all the things that can go wrong in a business. Outside of that, making sure your team is being built in the way you want it to be built is a really important thing to not lose track of.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The you people leave jobs or leave projects not because of the project, it's because of the people. And it's very tough. It's very tough managing. It's I think it's the toughest thing. Because the bigger the game, you got to be able to scale. No matter how skilled you are, you have limited time. As a skilled developer, you got to be able to communicate that and get X amount of people to kind of uh, to do what you need to do, delegated and everything. And you're completely right. Like the missing factor in probably why these startups do fail a lot is because they just rush they dismiss the culture part, right? I mean, every website that comes up, the first thing on their page is like, "Oh, we're about culture. We're about no." It's like, okay, all right. But the reality hits is like, "Oh, we meant that before we had the crunch." It's like, okay, we really need to get it done because there's no money. Forget culture. We got to get done. And so everything kind of gets thrown to chaos as soon as there's no funding to take your time on things, right? Um, But, to end it on a positive note, right? To basically go back to where we started. The industry is thriving. There's more projects than ever. A lot of what the movies are going through in terms of needing to feed content to the ever expanding streaming wars, right? Games are kind of following suit in that, right? If anything, the way Microsoft is buying Activision, right? Sony's trying to like square up. It's a fight for licenses and IPs right now, and creatives are more needed than ever. I think the scale back is to kind of reset the baseline that the pandemic kind of conflated a bit, right? Um, and it will take some time, unfortunately, for that correction to happen. And um, I think overall, I agree with you. If you have an idea, I mean, you can get funding. It's always better, even though there's like a 5% success for startups or 5% or under. Um, the more ideas, the better. My reservation is just like, there are salty investors out there. I mean, there's so many times I look at like illicit investors and they specifically put down no fucking games. Like, don't talk to me if you make games. And it's like, man, they don't say that about anything else. Biotech, all this stuff, like that often, really sinks the stock market, right? But it's games specifically. So there's a lot of bad reputation that's happening right now within the investor circles. And if but again, like you said, if they understand so little about the game industry, do you really want to go in the business with them? Can they withstand the creative process of what it takes to get games? Like maybe it's a good thing that they peace out, right? And the people who are staying in are the people you really want to talk to. So I guess it's all part of dumb luck, right? I think you're convincing me. It's like just let it be. Just do the best you can.
And
Don't
that's
worry about everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why publishers are such a strong route if you want to take that route, because publishers do understand games. They understand the market. They have a lot of metrics to back it up. And hopefully they have the player base of the kind of target demographic that you're targeting with your game, with your target audience. So that's why publishers do have a place in the industry. And yeah, from the more investor side, I mean, there are games investors. There are some angel investors that have made money in games that are willing to invest. But yeah, for the most part, unless it's a game specific fund, you probably want to, especially for your first project, you probably want to find a publisher if you are looking for investment, because that will be the route where you can learn the most from the people funding your game.
Yeah. Well, we hit the hour mark, and hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. This is the part where I actually shut up, hand the mic over to you. I want to thank you on behalf of everybody listening, coming back on and sharing your knowledge. But the floor is yours.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on again, Brennan, because I felt the same after our first call as well. It's just nice just chatting these informal conversations. And your questions kind of cause me to articulate something in real time that I've not necessarily thought about for a long time. So I guess just by the process of speaking out loud, I'm kind of developing the thoughts myself. So, it's been beneficial to me as well. And hopefully it has been for your audience. So yeah, thank you for that.
Perfect, man. Well, it sounds like you guys gonna go back in the cave, put together your prototype. Obviously, would love to kind of talk more about it when you can talk more about it. Um, if there's one word of advice for those, fortunately for you, you haven't been laid off in the last 12 years. But I'm sure we have friends, within our circles that are going a really rough time right now. We hate it. Um, you know, Crazy enough, it usually happens at this time, but this year it's been happening since like the summer. So I know personally some people that's been struggling since for like 4 or 5 months now, and it's just getting worse. Do you have any word of advice, maybe digging back before starting the studio, what a perfect time this is to do something, and use this as an opportunity, not just as a unfortunate event. Uh, I think that would be good for anyone that's listening.
Yeah, when you said a word, I was thinking like a word that I could use, and I think the thing that's kind of served us the best over our 12 years is just, I mean, I feel like I could probably say something smarter and more prophetic, but like maybe just consistency, like showing up every day, being there to do the work. Some days are tough, some days get easier. It's always a push to try and get your projects out into the world. So you've just got to show up at the same time every day, have some consistency, be there, especially if you're going through a tough layoff. I can only imagine how tough and stressful it is. It's always tough at any time of the year, but I guess especially this time of the year as the year starts wrapping up into the holidays. But just showing up every day, turning on your computer, working on your work, whether that be CV, portfolio, reaching out to your network, just showing up and doing the work. Because there's always the games industry, although it can go through twists and turns, for the most part, does reward consistency and hard work. And for the people that create good projects, there'll always be space and opportunities there, I think.
Amen to that. I usually call those people in the office professionals. The one that gets laid off last, the one that doesn't complain, the one that shows up no matter what, never gets in the gossip. That's a goddamn professional right there. But I think that's actually really good advice. Yeah. Listen up, people. There's plenty of work to do right there. As always, thank you for coming on. For those listening, where can they be? Where are you hanging out right now in social media? Is it on X? Is it on Instagram? Where can they find you?
So on X and Instagram, we're just White Paper Games. I'm Pete_Bottomley. I will mostly use LinkedIn over X for any people that want to connect. And I also host a podcast called Real Time Roots. So if you're interested in any kind of leadership and process-driven conversation, and it's more about real-time industries, so film, television, games, animation, just any people that are using this real-time technology as the industries start to shift. That's kind of a key focus of mine as well. So definitely check that out if you're interested in those topics.
Perfect. All right, everyone click through. Everything will be in the link and description below. See you guys later. Hello, everybody. Brandon here. I want to talk to you today about something very special. We've been on this wild ride together, haven't we? From my early days as a senior employee, feeling a bit lost, all the way to leading multiple studios, transitioning to smaller indie teams and to the mobile industry, and now running my own game studio for the last 6 years. Throughout this time, you've been here listening and learning along with me, sharing this never-ending journey of discovery. This year, I'm kind of on this quest of meeting serial studio founders, discussing acquisitions, or exploring what it takes to grow a studio to over 100 developers. I've always tried to find an exciting topic to delve into, and every year is a little different. The focus is a little different because that's where I am in my career currently, and I want to be able to share what I'm learning with you guys. So I've always been dedicated to asking the tough questions, bringing you insightful answers from industry leaders and experts. And now I want to share with you how I'm applying these answers to my own journey. This is why I'm excited to announce that for just $1.99 per month, you can now subscribe to our exclusive content series. These bonus episodes will give you a deeper look into my personal experiences and how I'm putting into practice what our esteemed guests are preaching. It's more of a personal side of the journey that I hope will show you that we're all in this together and we're all continuously learning. Whether you're a game developer, studio founder, or just a passionate gamer, there's something in it for everyone. By subscribing, not only will you gain access to this exclusive content, but you also be supporting the ongoing production of the regular programming. It helps keeps the lights on and ensures that I can continue bringing you top quality content and insight into the world of game development. The links to subscribe are in the description. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep doing what I love, sharing this journey with you. So show some love, hit that subscribe button, and let's continue this adventure together. Thank you all for your continued support. And as always, stay tuned for more exciting content. Until next time, this is Brandon, signing off.